Hello everyone, this is Professor Robert Solis. Welcome to this next video lesson. I'm going to be talking about random numbers, how to generate random numbers. So let me go ahead and start a project. And of course, Visual C++, Visual C Sharp, sorry about that. Windows Forms application. And over here I'll type in C Sharp. And we'll call this random numbers. And I don't know if I'm going to have a part 2, so I'll just put a number 1 right here. Click OK. Let me go ahead and open up the toolbox and also the properties panel. I'll start off with a button, a label, and a text box. For the label, let me change the font size property to 12 points. Then I'm going to move this to the upper left-hand corner. All right, for this label, I'm going to change the text property to enter integer range, colon. And the idea is to put a text box over here and a text box over here. And I'm trying to simulate or randomize numbers from 1 through 6, say for example. Generate numbers that a die would generate, right? Which is a cube that has numbers 1 through 6 on it. Okay, so I'll take the text box and let me change that font size property to 12. And I'll put that over here, like this. And minimize the size. Let me go ahead and take this label, copy and paste, which is Control-C, Control-V as in Victor. I'm going to change that text property and put the word to. Put that over here like this. That looks pretty good. Take this text box, Control-C, Control-V as in Victor for copy and paste. Something like that. So enter integer range. So this will be the lower bound. This will be the upper bound. And then I'll go ahead and have this button over here. We'll span across like that. Let me change the font size property to 12 points. And I'll change the text property to randomize. Then I'll place a label down here to indicate what the number is, the randomly generated number. So let me go to the auto size property, change that to false, border style fixed single. I'll change the size to something like this. That looks pretty good. I don't want the text to be in the upper left-hand corner in terms of its alignment. So what I'll do is I'll change this to middle center. And then I can get rid of the text. So let me hit backspace. Let me change the size of the form to something like this. I'm going to get rid of the minimize and the maximize box. Again, you don't have to. I just don't like them. And then instead of form 1 for the text property, we'll say randomize. Okay, just like that. That looks pretty good. Let me go ahead and change the names. So for example, this guy over here, the text box, we're going to change that to txt lower bound. This guy over here is going to be txt upper bound. This obviously says btn randomize. And then of course we're going to have our label down here. We'll just call that LBL result. Let me double check my work. Let's see here, txt lower bound, txt upper bound, btn randomize, LBL result. Everything looks good. Let me go ahead and save this and double click the button so that we can take a look at the code, but I don't need this toolbox panel. I don't need this properties panel, so let me get rid of those to give me some more screen real estate. And let me go ahead and type in declarations. Get user input calculation output. All right, and the first thing that I want to do is to place my cursor over here after where it says form, where that curly bracket is, hit enter a couple times. I'm going to type in the words global declarations. Now, the reason why I am creating these global declarations, I'm going to show you something at the end of our program that is going to keep track of all the counters for the number of times that the number 1 came up, or the number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so I'm preemptively getting ready for that. And what global declarations does is it makes this available to everyone. So if I typed in something like this, int 1 counter, we'll set that to 0. And let me just take this guy over here. Control C, copy, and paste. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'll change these to keep track of how many times did the number 2 come up, how many times did the number 3 come up, so forth and so on, for all of the numbers that appear on a die. And finally we have 6. Okay. These variables are global. Everyone can see them. They are not local, which is what these variables are. These variable declarations are local. They only belong to this particular subroutine, or this particular procedure. These aren't inside of a procedure, so therefore everyone can see them. I'm going to delay this for the time being to make it so that we're just simply going to be displaying a random number. Then I'm going to extend this form, type in the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we'll have a counter beneath to see how many times these various numbers appear. Okay, so back to our discussion about generating random numbers. And so first what I'll do is I'll create an integer called lower bound. I'll create another integer called upper bound. And then I'm going to create another integer called my random number, which is a random number that is created based on the lower and upper bound. In order for me to do that, I'm going to type in the word random with a capital R. I'm going to create a random generator, which I'll just simply abbreviate like this, randgen, random generator. Type in the word new, and then once again type in the word random with an open and closed parentheses, semicolon. This is an object. This is a class called random. This object is of type random. In other words, what this thing does is it's responsible for creating random numbers. This class has all kinds of tools that are available. A class is like a toolbox. Inside of a toolbox, what do you have? Tools. Well, this is going to be one of the objects of this type that I'm going to access some of the various tools, and I'll show you that in just a moment. Over here, in terms of the user input, we are going to get this number, the lower bound and the upper bound, and we're going to place this into here. So we'll say lower bound, and we're going to convert to int 32 whatever is inside of this text box called lower bound dot text. We're going to do the same thing for the upper bound. We're going to assign it the contents of the text box, which is txt upper bound. So let me double click dot text. All right, so I've obtained the numbers from the user. Now I can perform a calculation. So over here, go into calculation, press enter. I want to generate a random number. Is there a generator, a random number generator, that I can do such a thing? Yeah, I've just created it over here. This random number generator is of type random, and this is the class that's needed to create random numbers. Now, we don't talk a whole lot about classes in this intro course. That's something that we talk about in later courses, but I just want you to think about it this way for the time being. This is a library. This is a class. This is an abstract. You instantiate or create things from this. For example, think about the word vehicle. Now think about my Toyota Camry. My Toyota Camry is a vehicle. Okay, so this would be like my Toyota. This would be vehicle, right? So this is a class. This is a thing that you close your eyes and you think about abstractly. This is the tangible instantiation or creation from that particular class. So what I need to do is I need to generate a random number. This is what I need to type in order to create a random number generator. So what I'm going to do is this, rand generator dot next. Okay, look at all these tools that I've got. Next bytes, next double. I've got some tools here when it comes to creating random numbers. And what does this one say? This one says returns a non-negative random integer. Okay, so that's what I want. All right, let me put a parens here. Looks like I've got three flavors of this next function. One returns a non-negative random integer. In other words, a positive number. Over here, it looks like it returns a non-negative random integer that is less than the specified maximum. So whatever number that I put over here, it's going to give me a random number less than the number that I placed in here. And then I've got this third version, which is what I'm going to use, where I put a minimal value and a maximal value. Notice this word inclusive. That applies to this. You're going to see the word exclusive over here apply to this. All right, so inclusive. In other words, if I type in the lower bound right here, which is something that the user enters, right? In this case, let's say they enter the number 1. This is going to be the random number, the inclusive lower bound of the random number returned. So in other words, of the random numbers that I will generate, we're going to start from this lower bound, comma, of the random numbers that I generate, we are going to exclude the number all the way up to the upper bound. So if this were 1 through 6, if this were 1 comma 6, 6 would never be one of the random numbers that this thing generates because we are excluding that number. Whereas back over here, let me get rid of this, type in lower bound. This number is being included in the batch of random numbers that I'm going to create. This number is not being included. In fact, it's being exclusive. We are going to exclude this. So if I wanted numbers 1 through 6, I'd have to type in 1 comma 7. If I wanted random numbers from 1 through 10, I'd have to put 1 comma 11 because this is the upper bound being excluded. What if I wanted numbers from 5 through 9? Okay, so I put 5 comma 10 because remember that second number is being excluded. All right, so what I'll do is I want numbers 1 through 6 because over here the user is going to say 1 and put a 6 over here to simulate generating numbers from a die. So I better put plus 1 because they'll put 6 over here plus 1. That means I'll create numbers from 1 through 6. All right, now what I'll do is I'll just have a bunch of if statements. So I'll say if my random number that you just generated, if that's 1, then actually, you know what? I don't want to do this. That was the second part of the program that I wanted to create. So let me delay this just for the time being, and let me actually just simply display the results. So we'll say lbl result dot text is going to be convert dot to string whatever is inside. Oh, I'm sorry, not whatever is inside. Whatever this random number happens to be. Okay, so let me save the program. Let me run it. Let's see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to move this over here so that we can see the code. Let me type in a number 1. Let me type in a number 6 and randomize. Okay, so 4 came up. Now I'm going to tap it again and again and again. So you can see all the numbers that are being randomized. It looks like I see 1, I've seen 2, there's a 3, there's a 4, there's a 5, there's a 6. So it looks like all the random numbers from 1 to 6 are being generated here. Let me stop this program. You can see why I had to add this plus one rather, because this number is being excluded. Let's see what happens if I didn't type in the +1. So I want to generate numbers from 1 to 6. That's what the user's thinking, right? But then notice what happens when I click randomize. You'll never see a 6. You'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, but you'll never see a 6. And so that's why it's important to close this here and undo. Make sure that you always add 1 if you wanted to include whatever that upper bound is. Okay. All right, so that's how you generate a random number from one number to another. It doesn't have to be 1 through 6. Let's say that we want to generate numbers from 10 to 15, say, for example. Okay, so all the numbers that we see here are going to be 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. What I'm doing is I'm on my mouse pad, or trackpad I should say, I'm just tapping really fast this button right here. I guess if you want to hear me click it, I can do this. Watch. Or I shouldn't say watch, listen. Okay, you can obviously hear that, but I have it so that all I have to do is just tap it with my finger, and you can see the results. All the numbers from 10 to 15 are being generated. But what if I wanted to specifically make this to be like a, like a die generator? So maybe I should change that word randomize. For the text property for this form, we'll say randomize die generator. Something like that. In other words, we're randomizing numbers from 1 to 6. Okay. And I'll still let the user put in 1, 6, although I don't have to do it if I'm just going to be simply generating random numbers from 1 to 6. Let's go back over here now and have this discussion about generating counters. Now, I don't have to make these global. I think I'm just doing it just to show you that if you wanted to create global variables, this is what you would have to do. You would have to put them outside of any particular procedure, any particular function. And so the way that you do that is where it says form over here after the curly bracket for form, this is where you would declare your variables. And so I created a variable for each of the different numbers, and I want to keep track. How many times did the number 1 come up? How many times did the number 2 come up? So forth and so on. So now let me go back over here, and where it says calculation, let's modify this program by saying if my random number is equal to 1. If a 1 was generated, then I'm going to increment the 1 counter. And the way that I can do that is to use this shorthand notation. I didn't have to use this shorthand notation. I could have done this, 1 counter plus 1. I could have done that, right? This is the shorthand notation that means the same thing. Plus equals 1, which means add 1 or increment 1, or add 1 to the 1 counter or increment 1 counter. So it's the same thing. All right. Then I'll say else if my random number is equivalent to 2. Notice the 2 equals symbols because you're asking a question. Is this equal to this? So you have to put 2 equal symbols. If you do this, you're going to get in big trouble. And I don't think CSharp will allow you to do that. There's that red squiggly underline. So you've got to put 2 equal symbols when you're asking a question. If that is the case, then the variable 2 counter is going to also increment by 1. In fact, let me save myself some typing by copying this, Control C, Control V as in Victor for 3, 4, 5, and 6, and then I'll just change the numbers. So this will be for 3, for 4, 5, and 6. Instead of the word 2 counter, we're going to type in 3, 4. I guess I could have completely double click, type in 5, and then hit tab. Same thing over here, double click, 6, tab to select those, however you want to do it. The idea is this: any time that these numbers appear, increment the counter so that we can keep track of how many times these numbers are randomly appearing. And then I think what I'll do is this. Let me go back to the form, and I'm going to modify this so that I have numbers above here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then labels below them to indicate how many times those numbers appeared. So I guess I'll just take this label right here. Let me copy and paste that, put that over here. I'm going to change the properties for that so that auto size is false, and let me go ahead and put a border style of fixed single. That's fine. And I think I want to make sure that the text is aligned, so I'll just simply say middle center. And let me change the text property to 1 for this guy. Actually, I should change it to 0 because that's what we're going to start off the counter as 0. So that looks pretty good. Make it just a little bit bigger. That's fine. Place this over here. Let me Control C as in copy, Control V. I'll place this over here. Control V. Let me select these 3. Control C, Control V. Okay, so good. I have a total of 6 here, but I want to spread them out. So I think what I'll do is I'll take all these. Actually, you know what? I have to have numbers above them first. So before I spread them out, let's do this. Let me move these down here. I'm going to Control C, copy, Control C, Control V as in Victor, paste. And these guys over here, these are going to be the labels that represent what numbers we are keeping track of. So this will be 1, 2, so forth and so on, all the way to 6. That way I know that the label below it represents the counter. So for the number 5, this is the counter. And then of course for this guy, the number 6, this is the counter. In fact, I don't want single border lines. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to place my mouse pointer over here, hold down the mouse, select all these guys, and I think I can bulk remove the fixed single and make that fixed, or none, I should say. Sweet, look at that. That's pretty nice. I'm going to take both of these by selecting them, touching them, let go, and let me move that up here. That looks good right there. See, for example. All right, let me start off with this bottom row here. I'll take this guy by itself. I'll move it all the way over here. See what it looks like with the blue line to the right, the magenta underline underneath. Let go. I want all of these to be spaced out evenly. So watch this. I'll select this. I'm going to hold down Shift. Tap, 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 and then tap. Then these guidelines or these tools appear over here, and I want to evenly space items. Let's see here. This deals with middle. This says make same height. I don't want that. Oh, look at this. Make horizontal spacing equal. Yeah, that's the guy that I want. Let me tap. Look at that. It makes the spacing equal. I'm going to do the same thing over here. But first, I had better establish where this guy needs to go. That guy needs to go right here. Right there. Let go. I'm going to select this one, hold down Shift. I'm still holding down Shift as I'm selecting these in order. Finally, I select that last one. I want this guy over here, make horizontal spacing, tap, beautiful. Everything is now horizontally spaced. That looks pretty good. Of course, I could make some micro adjustments, but you get the idea in terms of what this thing is supposed to look like. All right, this over here, let's go ahead and give a name to the various labels. This is going to be LBL1 counter. In fact, let me just take this guy and copy it, so Control C. And then over here, I'll paste. Actually, you know what I should really do is, because I need to remove this, I'll copy this. Let me double click, copy, and then I'll put my cursor right here and type in the word 2. For this guy, double click over here, paste, and then I can just simply move my cursor back over here, type in the word 3, and so forth and so on. I'm always trying to find ways to make it easier and faster for me to code, because let's face it, time is money, and in this industry, those who are successful are those who can get the job done quickly, because time is money. All right, let me go over here and type in this label, which is LBL6 counter. All right, great. So I've got all my counters. Let me save. I'm going to go back to the code area, so I can either click on this tab or double click the randomize button to take me back into the code area. And what I need to do is to establish over here in the output what those values are. So we'll say LBL1 counter dot text. We're going to convert dot to string whatever is in the variable 1 counter. I think what I'll do is I'll just take all this, copy and paste it, and then I can change the words. This will be for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So LBL2, oops, I said LBL3. LBL2, there we go. Excuse me. LBL3, LBL4, LBL4, there we go. LBL5, LBL6. And then, of course, I have to change these to TWO counter, 2 counter, 3 counter. So I'm just typing the initial parts of the word. Microsoft's IntelliSense recognizes what I'm trying to type, and then I just hit tab to change all those. So let me just verify my work. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yep. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That looks good. We're going to increase, based on the number that was generated, we're going to increase the counter for each of these, and it should display them on our counters below. Let me hit start, and let's see what happens. So I want to generate numbers from a die, and that means 1 through 6. Randomize. Okay, so it looks like 4 came up. Notice that the 4 counter increased by 1. Randomize. Okay, the 2 came up, so the counter increases for 2. 6, 2. See, 2 used to be 2. The counter used to be 2. Now this has come up 2 times, the number 2. Ah, the number 6 came up 2 times. And now let me tap this thing really fast, right? And let's just see what happens. So you'll notice that the numbers are increasing randomly. Looks like the number 2 is ahead of all the others in terms of how many times it has appeared. And it looks like the number 1 is dragging in terms of its counter. And so I can, and if you click randomize, your numbers are going to be different than mine. The idea is we're keeping track of these numbers, how many times they appear. Looks like number 2's got a healthy lead, and number 1 still is lagging. But if I kept on doing this for 1,000, 10,000, so forth and so on, you might see that this guy would increase and maybe this one decreases. You know, the idea is any one of these can randomly appear. One does not necessarily have an advantage over the other. It just happens to be that in this case, the number 2, you know, is appearing more often than the others. But again, that's just for, I don't know what, 100, 200, 300 tries. But again, if I went to 10,000, or even not 10,000, not so big, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000, again, you would see these numbers start to balance out as you randomize these over time. Okay. All right, so that's, I also noticed that the top part is being cut off here. So notice that in the design view, that looks okay, but in runtime, sometimes that's a little bit different. So I think what I'll do is I'll just simply take this guy, let me hold down Shift, select these, and I'm going to use my arrow button to bring that down. Let's see, 2 steps. Let's see if that looks better. Yep, now I can see all of the entire border, the fixed single border for each of these different labels. And of course, I can type in my numbers and then hit randomize, and you can see what happens right here. Okay. All right, and that is it. So this is Professor Robert Solis. I hope this video lesson was helpful. Have a good day. See you next time.